Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another Game Explained discussion. I'm your host, Steve Bowling, and I'm joined by two people to talk about a very, very big game. I'm joined by Kat Bailey, editor-in-chief and host of Axe of the Blood God podcast for US Gamer, and Greg Miller, who you can find at youtube.com/kindafunnygames. How are you today, Kat?
I'm doing wonderfully, thank you. I'm ready to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 after staying up until like 1:30 in the morning just reading tweets because everybody has so many takes about this game.
Oof. How about you, Greg? How you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I'm tired, just like Kat. Yeah, recording this the day of the embargo, up late, making sure everything went the way it should be. But then, everybody's fascinating dissection of what they played.
Oh yeah, I stayed up till about 1:30 as well, both moderating our comments because I don't want people going in and kind of ruining the experience for everyone else, as well as just reading everyone else's reviews and seeing, how I felt, because it's weird how we review these games and we don't really talk to each other much because you don't want to be influenced by another person's take on the game before you've written your opinion piece. And I was very happy to find I was not alone in praising this game. I think it's an incredible game. Kat, let's start with you. What were your kind of summarized thoughts on The Last of Us 2 overall?
It's really hard to summarize my thoughts on this game because there's so much to unpack. But really, I really enjoyed this game. I kind of went in feeling a little cynical about it because I wasn't that invested in the emotional feelings of the original Last of Us. I didn't identify with Joel that heavily, but when they shifted the perspective to Ellie, I had an easier time to getting into it, and I came to really care about these particular characters and where they were going. And I found its themes of, violence is bad, the cycle of revenge will destroy people and whole communities, someone's always going to come after you if you try to kill somebody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People can say that they're really on the nose, but I think they're pretty worthwhile. And then beyond that, the execution, the world design, it's all impeccable. I think my only problem with it maybe is the pacing. It really, there's a certain point where you're just yeah, get on with it. Okay, it's probably about 5 hours too long, which kept it from being, a complete instant classic for me. 5 out of 5, perfect score. Was the pacing issues dragged it down a little bit, but beyond that, it's a fabulous game and certainly one of my favorite games of 2020.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. How about you, Greg? What were your thoughts on the game?
When I finished it and reflected on it and, was able just to talk it out, I think, with my wife, who was along for the ride most of the time on the couch, I think The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece. I think it excels at everything it tries to do. And not only excels, sets new standards. The way I've been trying to describe it to people is that for me, it's more than a video game, right? It's somewhere between a video game, a movie, and a really good book. Because I feel like it explores relationships and character growth in a way video games don't. And I think it's the continuation of what Naughty Dog nailed, I think, at the end of The Last of Us Part 2, at the end of Last of Us Part 1, which was that I was expecting when I ran into the spoilers for Last of Us Part 1, when I ran into the operating room to get a choice, which was going to be either do I choose to save Ellie or do I choose to save humanity? And when I didn't, that was this moment for me of I'm not in charge of this story. This is very much someone is telling me a story and I'm along for the ride and I have to take from it what I want to take. That feeling at the end of Last of Us Part 1 is the entirety of Last of Us Part 2. And I think that's what makes all of us want to stay up till 1:30 on a work night to read other people's takes and read other people's interpretations. Because a good book, Christine Steimer from What's Good Games, she was on our review of it, and when she knew and I knew we both had it and she finished it, we went back and forth with these giant texts and missives about what we thought it meant and what this symbolism was and why this character arc was similar to this but there are different points. And I think that's so rich, and I don't see that enough in games. I can't praise The Last of Us Part 2 enough.
Yeah, it's interesting, Greg. You mentioned not having a choice, in some ways being kind of along for the ride. It reminds me a little bit of the Infected. I was reading about the Infected, and it turns out that the zombies are aware of their actions, but unable to control themselves, which is why they're always kind of moving all jerkily and making groans of pain and everything. in The Last of Us Part 2, there's almost a little bit of that feeling as well, where it has you doing things where you're like, I really don't want to be doing this, but you're forcing me to do it, and please stop, game. Oh my god, I don't want to do this anymore. Please make me stop hitting the A button over and over again.
And that's the thing, right? The amount of times I feel like, and I think so many people, especially in this weird review period where we can't spoil things, and we wouldn't want to, but where you can't really get into it. So many people, when I've said that, have taken it away of like, oh, well, sure, the violence for violence sake. And for me, when I think of this game and I think of Last of Us Part 2, I don't think of that. I think of the choices Ellie is making. And it's that thing of like, oh my God, no, why would you do that? Oh my, and I have to go with her on her personal journey, right? Even though I know that's not what I would do, and I don't think that's what anyone would want you to do. And you're not learning from, you learn so much from Joel in the first game, right? I always felt like, especially in Last of Us Part 1, when we take control of Ellie, it had been this thing of we were quietly training her, and now she gets to go do, what she's learned from you. It's the same thing here, obviously, getting to play as Ellie, of going out and being like, okay, cool, no, you've learned how to be a killer. Like, if the events of the first game and Joel taking you on this journey taught you how to sneak around and use listen mode and do this, but it's like you're not taking the lessons of the 20 years Joel had between Sarah and you to heart.
Well, it makes me sad because Ellie is a cold-blooded killer in The Last of Us Part 2, to the point where she's almost a psychopath at times. And I didn't see it as her not learning. I see it as the horrific world that she lived in kind of hardening her and hardening her heart.
That's fair.
And you can see it. I don't know if it was just her being a teenager or if it was the world or what, but she's kind of a bright, intelligent kid in the original Last of Us. And here she's much more reserved, I feel like. She kind of talks in a very flat, kind of quiet voice. She holds back a lot, especially like you can see the contrast between her and say Dina from the very beginning. And I think it shows how Ellie has been forced to grow up too early, and in becoming a trained killer, she's also kind of lost herself. And that to me is kind of a tragedy of her character.
Well, totally, 100%. And I think, a big part of it, and again, there's no spoilers for Last of Us Part 2 in this, but you see when they started going out and talking about Last of Us Part 2, Neil Druckmann was very clear when he would speak about it of like, there's a reason this is Part 2 and not The Last of Us 2. Like, this is, 50% of the story in the same way The Last of Us Part 1 was. And I think, for 7 years, we've wrestled with that final scene of Joel and Ellie in Last of Us Part 1, where she's like, if you're lying to me, have you been upfront? Do you swear that everything you said is true? And Joel says, I swear. And you see in her eyes, she doesn't believe him. Yeah. But she goes, okay, like that's how this has got to be. And I think that's like, this huge ramification on why she is the way she is and how she is in this world that, she should be happy to be in, but she knows there could have been more.
Greg, I didn't see that comment from Neil, but I 100% see where he's coming from, because when I was playing it, I kept thinking about how it so completely bookends the original game. I think I called it in my review, Last of Us Part 1 is action and Last of Us Part 2 is reaction, where everybody is dealing with the emotional fallout from the original game. Last of Us Part 2 is so dependent on Last of Us Part 1, but in a lot of ways, Last of Us Part 1 is also really dependent on Last of Us Part 2, and in that, they, I think, tell a complete story to the extent that I kind of wanted, when I was done, I kind of wanted to immediately go back and play the original game, because I wanted to see how it informed me. And I think that's maybe what a really good sequel does.
That's exactly what I did. Like we had been doing over on Twitch and on YouTube a full playthrough of Nick playing The Last of Us Part 1 for the first time. And so I was, his shotgun co-pilot for that, and I was looking at comments and joking around and, making content. So I was like, oh, I'm briefed on the ideas of what the game is, and I remember the plot points, that anything I had forgotten about. Jumped in for review, played through Last of Us Part 2, and when I finished it, the first thing I did was re-download Last of Us Part 1 and Left Behind, played through them, and then rolled right into Last of Us Part 2 again for my second playthrough. And it's that weird thing of playing Last of Us Part 2 got me excited to play Last of Us Part 1 again. And then when I was playing Last of Us Part 1, it was like, I can't wait to get back to Last of Us Part 2, because there is this relationship lineage back and forth, and like if I hadn't played 2 and 1 so close together and then back into 2, there's so many lines and so many references and so many things that do come up in the second one that I wouldn't have gotten. Like I would have forgotten that Ellie had made some comment about this, or that Ellie has guessed this before, and Joel, off of this one offhand comment, remembers that means something to her.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier, Greg. You had mentioned that you were consistently not wanting Ellie to do the things she was doing in the game. And I find that interesting because I was talking to a friend who doesn't have the game about it. And without going into spoilers, I was trying to explain how I felt about it. And I described it as basically the game felt like the microwave hallway from Metal Gear Solid 4, but the whole game is that.
Yeah,
and
no, that's really accurate.
Yeah, I felt like I was constantly pleading, like, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Like every step of the way along Ellie's journey. But I find Kat's take really interesting as well. Kat, you were mentioning that you feel that it's more like she's a byproduct of the world that she's grown up in, because unlike Joel, she doesn't have a huge history before the apocalypse basically happened. She doesn't have like a whole long life before that occurred. And so a lot of her formative years are spent dealing with this crap. So I guess my question to both of you really is, do you think at the end of this, do you feel that Ellie made the right choices? Do you feel like she came out better or worse as a person by the end of this story, without obviously giving anything away?
I was gonna say, what a tough question. Kat, you take it. You take first crack.
Gosh. I can't. It's really hard to discuss this without going into the ending. I will say that I think that there was an ending that I would have preferred in which Ellie came out better. That's what I'm going to say.
That's fair. That's fair.
And maybe we can get into it during the spoilers, but I guess in that respect, she came out worse in this. If we're talking about winners and losers of Last of Us Part 2, Ellie was a loser.
Yeah, 100%. That's the thing about it, where I remember rolling credits on Last of Us Part 1, going on the podcast and stuff, and being like, Joel's the bad guy. And everybody's like, no, you don't understand, yada, yada, yada. Like, if you had a daughter, if you had a child, you would understand what you do anything. And I was like, I get that, but I also get humanity, and I'm not about what, blah, blah. I think that when you finish Last of Us Part 1, or I'm sorry, when you finish Last of Us Part 2, I don't understand how anyone could look at this and be like, Ellie made the right Ellie made right choices here. This is exactly how the happy ending we wanted for her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, fair. It's interesting that you mentioned that, Greg. I think I'm the only one in this discussion that has children, and I completely identify with Joel's choices at the end of The Last of Us Part 1. I don't know that I could stand in front of someone knowing how high the stakes are. I still don't know that I could tell someone, yes, please, kill my daughter. That's hard. It's unfathomable to me that I would agree to that under any circumstance. And so there's a part of me that understands where Joel's coming from. And I kind of have the inverse relationship with these games that Kat does, because because I'm a father, I'm very easily able to identify with Joel and his feelings in The Last of Us Part 1, whereas, Ellie's experience is far different from my own. But that said, I felt like I could understand her motivations on their face, like without examining them deeper, which I think The Last of Us
Part 2.
Yeah. Ellie's motivations in The Last of Us Part 2 on the surface level, when you first begin this quest, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I understand what you're doing, but the further you get into the game, the more it's like, oh no, please, like, stop. This is ugly. This is bad.
To dodge spoilers best you can, like, I'm right there with you I understand what Ellie's motivations are, I should say. And not only do I understand them, I think they are enhanced and made more concrete by how old she is. Because I do remember being young, and you have those friends, and you make those decisions together, and you make those stupid pacts or whatever it's going to be, and you literally have that mentality, right, of like, no, this like we're ride together, die together, Fast and Furious kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it's like that if something was to ever happen and you have to go off on a journey of revenge, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and never stop to actually ask yourself, is this the right decision? You know what I mean? Are you on the right path here? The problem, the Joel being a villain and not being able to connect with his decision there, right, is twofold. And I think honestly, it's one of the, I would say, and I'm not like somebody who thinks about it often, but I would say the biggest plot hole of Last of Us Part 1 and the biggest leap in logic in terms of their fantasy world filled with cordyceps of Last of Us Part 1 is the leap in logic is the fact that Joel and Ellie arrive outside of the Firefly base in Last of Us Part 1. Ellie's unconscious. Joel's doing CPR compressions on her. They knock out Joel, but they're able to, he did or they do, restart Ellie's heart. She never wakes up. They immediately put her in an anesthetic. They immediately put her on a table. They separate her and Joel. Joel wakes up. They refuse to let her. It's like the entire situation. For me, came back to a conversation where Ellie literally, where Joel actually says to Ellie, like, we don't have to go any further. We can turn around. We can go back to Tommy's. We can live happily in Wyoming and Jackson. And she goes, this can't be for nothing. To which was me as the player being like, oh, she will do anything. She wants this to happen. She's there to help. And so there's this huge leap in logic for me, at least, of meeting up with the Fireflies and them never having a conversation with them about it. Because I would think that you would sit them both down and be, or at least Ellie, let her wake up and be like, listen, you know you're special. We know you're special. We figured this out. It will kill you when we want to have that conversation. And even if no matter what you did, the journey was going to be they were going to kill her, because I wouldn't put that past the Fireflies. I still think they'd present that choice to avoid this very same situation. And then the other half of that is that Ellie isn't Joel's daughter. Like, I understand that Joel's projecting Sarah onto Ellie in Last of Us Part 1. And that's why when we get there, they've found this new, relationship. They're talking about Sarah. They understand where they're at. But it still is that point of, you do anything for your daughter, which I totally get. You know what I mean? I imagine when I have a child, I will do anything for my child. But that's not his child. And I understand it's his second chance. And I know they do such a great job of non-verbally communicating it right, where and this is also fresh because I just played it last week, sorry. But when they're in Jackson and he's like, you got to take her, Tom. And he's like, why would I take her? And you go through this entire fight at the end. And then when they get reunited and Joel's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, and it was cool. And this Tommy sees it and he's like, I get it. Okay, I'll take her because, yeah, you can't be around her. She's becoming Sarah to you. Like, I get all that and I see where it is. But still, I would get to the end and be like, on top, full stop, I love you, and you're a part of my life and my world. But I also know that you just said you will do anything to make this happen. I don't want to get in the way of that.
I just want to say that I agree with Steve, actually. I'm not a parent, never will be, but I can completely identify with the idea that if you saw your child lying there on the operating table and she was going to die, and everybody had decided that she had to sacrifice herself for the good of humanity, I would be like, heck no, sorry. It's one thing to ask people to be selfless for this nebulous concept of saving humanity, and you don't even know if he's going to be able to develop a vaccine. It's like the game is basically like, yeah, I could probably develop a vaccine, but it's not like that in real life. I think a lot of people, like, we're selfish animals. A lot of people would be thinking about flesh and blood first. And even though she's not flesh and blood, she's as good as. They are as close as family. So I guess it's just such a hard thing to ask people to make that kind of sacrifice, And
you bring up a great point there, right? Of like, they're forcing it on her. I get that part of it. I do get that part of like, wait, we didn't even have a conversation with her. Like, you've decided that you're going to kill her. That's not cool. Let's figure this out. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So I think we could talk about the story of The Last of Us Part 2 for hours. And we'll get way deeper into that in our spoiler discussion, because I think that's where we can really break this down, which will be available here on the channel after the game releases. But for now, let's talk about, because there are obviously other parts. Greg, you described it as a great, movie, book, and of course a video game, which is the medium we're here to discuss. Mechanically, how did, let's go ahead and start with you, Greg. How did you feel about the mechanics of The Last of Us 2, how it functions actually as a game?
I thought it was wonderful, and I thought it was the evolution of everything that was laid out in Last of Us Part 1. Especially having played Last of Us Part 2, going back to Last of Us Part 1, I was struck by, granted, 7-year-old game, but struck by oh wow, the environments are so much smaller. Oh wow, like it is like light switch binary of like, all right, now I'm fighting clickers, now I'm fighting humans, now I'm moving this ladder, now I'm moving this pallet. It was like there's like delineations between what you're doing and why you're doing it, so you can get into a rhythm of, wow, this is a game. I feel like this is very much a game, right? Last of Us Part 2, I thought, took all the criticisms people had of The Last of Us's gameplay in general, right, of it feeling heavy and feeling too grounded and too stiff, and made it way more, not all the way in terms of the minutia and nerdiness that I love, but way more Metal Gear, where it does feel way more like Metal Gear Solid 5 to me. Of, I'm Ellie and I come into a new environment and I hear something, so I get down and I go prone, I crawl into some bushes, you know, I make my presence known by attacking someone, then I try to lose them, they don't know where I am anymore. Like, there's so many sprinkles and touches in it that I think, you know, being prone, rolling to your back, being able to shoot from your back like Snake, which was such a huge deal when they showed that in Metal Gear Solid 5. You know, going through the way they simplified crafting, the way they, I think, took the interface that in Last of Us Part 1 was meant to look like, oh man, like it's post-apocalyptic and kind of like rugged or alternative. And like, here it's like, it's this, you know how to craft. This is what it looks like. It all makes sense and we're into it. Ellie being able to climb, Ellie being able to jump, you know, the way she runs, the way she can dive into cover. Like, I think they did such a great job of making a game that is fun to play. And on my second playthrough, a game that was fun to experiment with. You know, my first time around was very much like walking into areas and, you know, spending way too much time sulking around trying to figure out how, or I can get on, you know, somebody's back without them seeing, do this, that, and the other. And then coming back now, it was like, cool, let's try the explosive arrows. Let's try these weird things that I would never use in my first crazy playthrough. But now that I understand the game and I understand where I'm going, let's screw around.
Trip mines are really good.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, I was about to ask Kat, how do you feel mechanically about the game? Because I think Greg touched on a lot of points I want to discuss a little further, but I want to hear your opinion first.
Well, I'll say first that I completely agree with everything Greg said about how fluid it feels when you're fighting. You feel amazing, frankly. The shooting's great. Going on your back is definitely a huge thing. I love how effortless the level design feels and how organic, and that is not an easy trick to pull off. I've played plenty of games of late, including God of War and Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the level design there has an artificial quality to it, or I can see the seams, and it's a lot harder to see the seams in Last of Us Part 2. I especially like how organic the traversal puzzles feel in comparison to the previous Last of Us, which felt a bit more artificial. I think that one kind of thing that stands out to me from a thematic standpoint is, so a lot of Last of Us Part 2 is about this notion of the people you're killing, they're not just faceless villains, they are actual people. And it's trying to make the violence hit harder. It's trying to add a sense of desperation to Ellie. And to an extent they do that they're successful. But at the same time, the fact that Ellie is effectively a super soldier, she's basically Snake in this game. Able to fight guys twice her size, and an incredible tactical stealth soldier, a crack shot with a rifle, able to use all of this stuff, can modify weapons, can take bullets, can just heal herself with a med kit immediately. Like that, I don't know if there's a way to fix that because Naughty Dog is using a particular formula, but I think it's something that you have to be aware of when you're crafting your particular story themes. And it doesn't ruin the game for me by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a thing that stood out to me a lot, was that it broke my immersion whenever Ellie would catch a shotgun blast and would not be quite dead, and I would just be like, get up my med kit, just kind of be like, just twist a bandage around her arm, she's all good, moving on.
Yeah, you know, now that you mention it, that is kind of it's something that I don't think about, and that's weird because it does kind of play counter to how I don't want to say realistic, because I'm fortunate enough not to have a real good realistic idea of violence, but it there's a disturbing quality to the violence in this game.
Let's just say if you were 19 and you took a bullet, you would not be continuing onward. If you took a knife in if you took an arrow in the shoulder, you would not yank it out and then move on with absolutely no consequences.
Right. And I think that that's one of the parts where they kind of, you still have to gamify it and make it feel like not frustrating to play, right? I feel like if it was more realistic in how Ellie takes damage, it would just get to the point, at least for players like me. I'm not great at The Last of Us Part 2, but I do enjoy it. But yeah, if I was gravely wounded every time I took a shot, I probably would have not made it through the game. But I do agree that it is kind of, there's a cognitive dissonance there where you shoot someone with a rifle and you see their hand or their leg come off and they're rolling around screaming, and Ellie is like, yep, just gonna throw a Band-Aid on this and I'm good. But the two of you made very interesting points that I kind of want to expand upon. One of the things that you've mentioned, I think twice now, Kat, is how great the world design is in this game. And I couldn't agree more. You go into and Greg kind of touched on this too, and his point is the environments in The Last of Us Part 2 are just incredibly large in comparison to the original. And there's parts where you wouldn't expect to have an easy time finding your way. Like there are lots of parts of Seattle that are just completely overgrown. There's, foliage everywhere, but they use clever tricks to kind of draw your eye in the direction that you need to go. And it consistently worked. I never once ended up like running through, into trees, finding invisible walls, nothing. Which is saying something, because they don't have a discernible path. It's not like the Nintendo style of level design where it's all laid out in a straight line in front of you. You feel like you're figuring out where to go, but you're really being very cleverly guided along the way. Without just signposts, making it super obvious.
Their signposting is the vines on the wall. They're just basically saying, you can't climb over this, go around. Or
right.
Their invisible walls are usually cars or something like that.
There are instances where there's just debris or smashed up vehicles in places. But I feel like overall they did a really great job kind of guiding you through these areas without making it feel artificial or strange. Like, I never was running around in circles trying to figure out where the hell I'm supposed to go. I always had a pretty good idea of what I needed to do to get to where I needed to be. I don't know if that was the same for the two of you.
Yeah, I talked about this in my review, actually, and I completely agree with you. First of all, I think the sense of verticality, that was a thing that they were talking about focusing on, and I think it completely works here. Like, there's these huge multi-level shopping malls and that kind of thing, parking structures that you're fighting in that feel really expansive, and you can do a lot in them. But more than that, you will often be in these really dark, claustrophobic spaces. And I'm not exactly claustrophobic, but when I'm playing in those areas in video games, I'm often like, oh, I don't like this, where you're in a sewer or something, and all you got is your flashlight illuminating the way ahead, and you have no idea where you're supposed to be going because there's no waypoint indicator or really no UI elements to speak of. And you're just kind of spinning around trying to find the way out. And in so many games, I would go crazy or get tired or want to quit. And somehow in Last of Us Part 2, I would feel disoriented, but never frustrated. And that is a heck of a trick to pull off in a game like this.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that even comparing that to Last of Us Part 1, you know what I mean? Of replaying that and getting to rooms and be like, oh man, I remember being stuck in this room. And I'm like, I know there's a ladder up there. How did I get to it? And even having already done it and then have 7 years on it, but go figure it out. I remember distinctly reviewing Last of Us Part 1 and being like, where am I supposed to go? What am I going to do? Running around a room, checking every corner, trying to figure it out. That didn't happen in Last of Us Part 2. Like, I do think that they have nailed that. And granted, they should after Last of Us and 4 Uncharted. So I guess 5 if you count Lost Legacy, right? Like, they know how to push a player through their environments and keep the story going. And I think, this game is good at not beating you over the head with it, but teaching you to follow the light. And I think that's how they do it and how they push you through. And I think this time around, they really experiment with, linear levels, but alternative paths, where the amount of times I'd be going, and of course, I'm a trophy whore. I want to get the platinum in this. I'd be going and I'd take path number 2 and I'd be like, well, wait a second, and double back to path number 1 and find out, oh, it pops out at the exact same place. It was just put there to give me agency and make the world feel fresh and diverse and, something that I could explore at my own pace. Like, that is super impressive. I go back to it all the time in the combat. I don't know how you do this. I have no earthly idea, but they're programming to make it that almost every one of my fights, even on the second playthrough, knowing who's in the room, having everything unlocked, every one of my fights seems to come down to the last bullet. I'm about to die or something. I've been running. I got this, an infected got the drop on me. I ran. I'm backed against the corner. My final shotgun shell, and I drop a, clicker and I have enough time to get out of there. Like, that happens over and over and over again, to the point that I love that excitement and that thrill, but it's crazy that they've crafted a game where that is how it gets played. And it's not like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game I love, but I just mow people down. Like, I'm not worried about anything in that game after this many playthroughs.
There are so many times where you will be hearing the clickers and all the sounds. You're like, it's coming. Here they come. And you're setting up, you get everything ready, and they all start coming in from every side, and you're switching weapons as fast as possible because ammo is relatively limited in this game, and you're using the environments to your advantage, and it feels completely organic. And there's so many times when I finished combat encounters in this game and just took a long phew. Oh my God,
Yep.
That was so intense and so exciting, and I really enjoyed that particular encounter, which is not a thing I can say about a lot of blockbuster games. A lot of combat in blockbuster games feels really rote to me, or not particularly deep. And I think The Last of Us Part 2 does not have that problem. That said, when I fought some of the larger enemies, there were at least 2 occasions where I swear to God, Benny Hill music was playing in the background as I ran around a table, and it was chasing after me. And I was just like, run, reload, stop, fire some shotguns, run. Benny Hill playing in the background.
Yeah, you play that corner game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just keep them far enough away from you to be able to do it, which then inevitably becomes hilarious. Yes, I'm right there with you. I'm like, all right, this thing's stupid enough that I can keep it at bay like that.
I mean, it is a pretty horribly and stupid fungus monster.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I think we're all talking about the same same encounter. So I'll be curious when we get into the spoilers to see if we're all on the same page here.
There are more than one monster that's like that.
That's true. But I have to say I agree with both of you. There's combat in this game instills like, it's weird. The only way I can describe it is like a fun sense of anxiety. Like I go into these encounters and I'm freaking out. Like, I'm taking stock of everything I have. I'm making sure, that if I'm against humans, they don't have a friggin' dog.
Those poor puppies. My God.
Yeah.
Can't deal.
Killing the dogs is really rough. There was one section where I was trying to avoid them. There was like 3 dogs on the field, and I saw the door. I saw the way out. I'm like, I'm just going to have Ellie sneak out. I was like, I'm just not going to deal with this today. And of course, it's a door that is like super noisy. She has to push her way through, and they're not infected. They're not dumb. So they all notice Ellie's over here trying to pull this door open real loudly, and I just got swarmed, and I realized I have to go through these dogs. Like, I have to kill at least the dogs and the people in the area around the door. And so I was like, there's no real way I'm getting out of this without taking every single person in this vicinity down. And it was so stressful, because by the end of it, like Greg mentioned, I was like down to a single bullet. I had nothing left. I was at the very end, I threw a bottle at someone and meleeed them just so I wouldn't use my last bullet, because I was afraid of missing. It seems like even if you go through and you replay these encounters, which I'm very early into a second playthrough, it still feels completely different every time I get into them. So it's just weird, because I feel like the AI in this game is just so good. With
one exception, they're kind of blind. They got nearsighted problems.
True. That's true. Like, I'll be shot. I'll be.
Well, they have no eyes, right? That's their thing.
Well, no, that's fine with the infected. I'm talking about the humans here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can be pretty close to them and be prone and still take them out, which is kind of interesting. Once I got the bow and arrow with Ellie, I felt like I had unlimited stealth capabilities as long as I had enough ammo to support them.
I rarely had enough ammo for my bow. It felt like I was constantly out.
I would consistently go for headshots because you can sometimes recover the arrow on those. And so I would never use the bow and arrow unless I was confident I could stick a headshot.
When it came time to craft shivs, I always picked that over the arrows.
Interesting.
That's what I did my first playthrough too. Yeah, because they're so helpful.
Shivs
if you do get nabbed,
shivs
right?
are a lifesaver against infected.
So is there anything else of note to you guys, without going into spoilers yet, about The Last of Us Part 2 that you'd like to discuss?
I think the audio design in this game is incredible. It bears repeating. Naughty Dog does this a really good job with this anyway, but it stood out to me constantly. Just the way that the characters will call out each other's name and freak out when, you take somebody out. The way that you can be guided through a level just by the audio cues from people talking or from the sounds of the monsters, the distinct sounds of the clickers versus humans. This really incredible scene where you're running down a hallway as fast as you possibly can, frantically avoiding various things, and you can hear just the absolutely terrifying sounds behind you, knowing that they are in pursuit. And it was straight up horror movie fodder. I think that Last of Us 2, it's generationally great audio.
Yeah, I completely agree. I played through the majority of my first playthrough with headphones.
I played it entirely with headphones, and that is the way to play it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. How about you, Greg? Did you stick with speakers or did you wear cans for this thing?
I went back and forth where when my wife would be awake and enjoying it with me, I would have going off the sound bar. And then when she would go to bed and I would need to be quiet so she didn't hear, I would put the headphones on. And yeah, I think that, headphones are so great for immersing yourself in this world. You know what I mean? Because again, to what you're talking about, and I think Kat nails it, like it is so impressive. With just the, dripping water while you're going underground or hearing something in the background, let alone, the thing I'd want to call out here is the acting. Again, it's so hard to go into because you don't want to spoil anything and talk about what character does who does what or anything. But the acting is so well done here, even down to I think the NPC level that we're talking about, where you are fighting a bunch of scars, you are fighting a bunch of WLF members, and I know it's such a small thing, but having somebody scream out of like Steve, oh my god, or the name of their dog when the dog gets taken out, like. There are little things that add up to make it feel more than just, killing soldiers in Metal Gear, just knocking them out and nobody cares about them. Like they do such a great job here of establishing that there is a backstory to these characters. There is a conflict going on that has nothing to do with Ellie. Like there's a world here. And I think that's driven home in every different respect, including, as Kat was talking about, the audio, including the performance, to really make this a complete package.
And we've been really overwhelmingly positive here. I will have to circle back and say that the reason that it wasn't a 5 out of 5 for me was I think that the second half drags considerably. And this is a thing that we can probably get into a lot more with spoilers.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And especially the ending maybe goes on a bit too long in a way that is difficult to describe, again, without going into spoilers. And I don't know, like the spoiler embargoes for this game are so strict that like I feel like I can't talk about half the things, which is really annoying. And
it's that thing too of like I'm right there with you of like I've been so shy, like I've been trying, in our review I was like, in a way this is 3 separate games and they're put together into one and and there's so much going on to it that I really want to talk to you about that second half when we get to spoilers.
Yeah, there's for one, I don't think any of us would want to spoil the game for people that are interested in picking it up, even if there wasn't an embargo in place. But I agree with Kat that there is just a whole lot to this game that we're not allowed to discuss because of that. But there is a huge, I think for me, this is a narrative driven game. So that's the most interesting part. And it's the part I can talk about the least.
Which makes, I think, the reviews the least interesting part of the discourse of Last of Us 2, because in the coming weeks we're going to be sitting here unpacking like every single element of The Last of Us Part 2, but with the review itself we're almost kind of reviewing it as product, which I find a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it speaks to the confidence PlayStation and Naughty Dog had in the gameplay, which I think if you talk to most people about Last of Us Part 1 would be the thing they'd get hung up on and not enjoy. I think it shows that, yeah, they believe, and I agree that they've changed enough in there to make it that you can have a conversation about it. But I'm exactly where you are. Yesterday when we were gearing up to do the review, Tim from my team was like, oh man, I'm so excited. I'm like, I'll be honest, I'm excited about the spoiler cast. Like, I don't know how this review, how long are we going to go saying that we liked mechanics and the story was cool, but we can't tell you, right? Like, it is more like I was talking about at the top of the show. Like, it is about, well, what did you take away? What was your interpretation? Where did you feel this deviated from that?
Right. That's kind of where I was at too. I was sitting at my computer drafting my review, and I was like, how do I get into how much I love this game without talking about the story? Because it had such a massive impact on me. And there are, like you mentioned, Greg, there are a lot of mechanical improvements that do make it just as a game really fun to play. It's easy to play The Last of Us Part 2 without having revisited Part 1, which I definitely want to do again now. And just assume that these controls are part and parcel with what came with Part 1. But there have been so many refinements. Ellie moves in a way that feels natural for a game released in 2020, where, The Last of Us Part 1 very much mechanically feels like a game that was a product of its time. So there are like small improvements, but I expected them to be there because of other games I've played in the 7 years between these two. So, I expect a character to be able to duck into cover and for animations to be fluid, to have a dodge, to be able to jump, to be able to do all these things that seem really basic, but maybe weren't such obvious design choices in 2013. All right, guys, that about wraps up our spoiler-free review discussion for The Last of Us Part 2. Thank you so much to Kat and Greg for joining me for this. Kat, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience, perhaps your own coverage of The Last of Us?
Yeah, well, my review is up. I have no idea how much coverage is going to be up at this point because the embargoes are so crazy and so strict. But we're going to be trying to write about it pretty much every single day for the next couple weeks. There's a lot to unpack with this game, so I'm really looking forward to it and really looking forward to the spoiler cast. But you should also check out my podcast, Axe of the Blood God. It's our RPG podcast that I host with Nadia Oxford. And I'm around the games industry. I've been on Kind of Funny a couple times.
Hell yeah!
You know where to find me. I'm on Twitter at @the_catbot, and you should go follow me for my soccer thoughts and Gundam thoughts and Last of Us 2 thoughts.
That is awesome stuff. I've been on Kat's podcast to discuss Final Fantasy VII Remake was the last time I was on, and it was a great time. I definitely recommend you guys check it out. I'll have a link to that in the description down below. How about you, Greg? Is there anything besides your awesome review, which is an hour long, by the way? Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I would love it if they'd come over to youtube.com/kindoffunnygames and drop us a subscription. Of course, we have Kind of Funny Games Daily up each and every weekday going through the nerdiest news in gaming. We do the Games Cast. We have, Last of Us review up. We have Last of Us 1 spoiler cast up. We're going to be doing our own spoiler cast for Last of Us 2. And then, Last of Us Part 2, we're going to have Neil Druckmann, Ashley Johnson, and maybe some other folks roll through to do a spoiler cast just with them. So lots of great stuff coming up on youtube.com/kindoffunnygames.
Awesome. And I've also have been on Kind of Funny Games once upon a time, and it's a great show. Make sure to drop in, check it out. I'm a huge fan of the show. Try to catch it as often as I can. Well, with that, thank you guys so much for joining me. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to Game Explained for much more on The Last of Us Part 2 and all other things gaming as well. Ring that notification bell to be the first to know every time a new video goes up, and I'll see you next time.